You think you know what a superpower looks like. Steel armies, flags on the moon. But what if I told you the first true superpower wasn't built on cannons, but on credit? It wasn't carved from stone, but from a promise to pay. And in the end, it was that very promise that ate it alive from the inside out. We're taught about empires that fell to invaders, to plague, to revolution. We're not taught about the one that filed for bankruptcy. Quietly, repeatedly, while still looking like the richest place on earth. Picture this, the 17th century. A tiny, waterlogged republic in northern Europe, fighting for its life against the greatest empire of the age, Spain. This shouldn't be a contest. It should be a slaughter. But this little nation, the Dutch Republic, doesn't just survive, it wins. And then, almost as an afterthought, it invents the modern world. The stock market, the central bank, the multinational corporation. They turned money into a weapon more potent than any gunpowder. They built an empire on a ledger. Amsterdam became the world's bank. If you needed to finance a war, build a fleet, or buy an entire spice island, you went to them. Their credit was legendary. Why? Because they always paid their debts. Investors lined up to give them money at the lowest interest rates anyone had ever seen. It was a perpetual motion machine of wealth. Debt created power. Power created more wealth. And wealth guaranteed more debt. On paper, it was flawless. But here's the part they don't teach you. That genius system contained a silent, slow-acting poison. The Dutch got good at war. Too good, and war is expensive. But when you're the financial wizard of the world, you don't feel the pain up front. You don't raise taxes and make your citizens angry. No, you just borrow. Issue more bonds, sell them to your own citizens, to foreign investors. The war against Spain bled into other conflicts, against the English, against the French, the endlessly rising superpower next door. Every time a new threat appeared, the solution was the same: leverage the reputation. Take another loan, and for decades it worked. The facade glittered. The canals were lined with gorgeous townhouses filled with paintings and porcelain. The middle class flourished. It looked like they had cracked the code. They believed their own myth, that Dutch financial ingenuity was a force of nature. Unbeatable. This is where things get ugly. The system depended on one fragile thing: trust. The trust that the Dutch state would prioritize its bondholders above all else, above its soldiers, above its people, even above its own sovereignty. So when wars got bigger and more existential, like the decades-long death struggle with Louis XIV's France, the borrowing became astronomical. They weren't just financing armies. They were financing a survival machine that ran on IOUs. The debt climbed to unimaginable levels. Historians calculate it reached a staggering proportion of their national income, a level that would make a modern economist faint. But the interest still had to be paid. So what did they do? They took out new loans to pay the interest on the old loans. A pyramid scheme dressed in a powdered wig. And who paid for it? Not the ultra-wealthy merchant elites who held the bonds. No, they were the creditors. The bill landed on the little guy. Taxes on basic necessities soared. Bread, beer, salt. Every staple of life carried a hidden surcharge to service the monster. The very people whose productivity built the empire were now shackled to its debts, feeding a machine that no longer produced victory but merely staved off collapse. The irony is thick enough to choke on. The first modern state, built on public credit, became a prisoner to its own lenders. Its foreign policy was no longer set by generals or statesmen, but by the need to maintain creditworthiness. They couldn't afford to win decisively, and they couldn't afford to lose. They could only afford to keep borrowing. And then the perception shifted. Slowly, then all at once, new players entered the game. A fledgling institution in Threadneedle Street, London, started copying the Dutch playbook. They saw the power of public debt, but they also saw the trap. And across the channel, a new kind of threat emerged. Not just a king with an army, but an idea, a revolution. And that idea asked a very dangerous question. What if a nation just stopped paying? What if it wiped the slate clean? The Dutch were frozen. Their entire identity was being the reliable one. The grown-up in the room of global finance. To default was unthinkable. It was suicide. So they kept paying, draining their economy, bleeding their people dry, while their geopolitical power evaporated. Their ships became outdated, their armies smaller, their influence a ghost. They were a financial shell, immaculately dressed, haunting the corridors of a power they no longer possessed. By the late 18th century, the truth was inescapable. The world's first financial superpower was a zombie. It still stood, it still paid its coupons. But its spirit, its innovative fire, was long gone, consumed by the compound interest on centuries of survival. And when the revolutionary winds finally blew in from France, the invasion was almost a formality. The state, hollowed out by its own genius, offered little resistance. The Batavian Republic was established, a client state. The fall wasn't with a bang, but with a ledger entry closed. So what's the takeaway? That debt is bad? That's too simple. It's that debt is a pact with time. The Dutch made that pact, and for a glorious century, time was their servant. They built the future with tomorrow's money, but then time became the master. And it collected its debt not in a dramatic crash, but in a slow, suffocating decline. They prioritized their financial reputation over their national vitality, and in the end, they lost both. It makes you look at our world differently, doesn't it? The towers of glass and steel, the complex derivatives, the bonds that span the globe. We live in the world they invented. The question their ghost asks us is just one of timing. When does the servant become the master? When does the tool become the cage? The Dutch didn't lose a war, they settled an account. And the final chilling line in their ledger reads, "The interest always comes due."